Do I have to use the microphone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the audio is like total crap and it's all static.
Check, check. I hate hearing myself. I hate hearing myself.
Don't talk.
My name is JP, and I'm Silent Lightning.
So we good? Are we good, or are we waiting for something?
Well, yeah, you should be good.
All right, so I'm JP, aka Punk Rock. I'm not a professional forensic guy. I just ended up doing some crazy work, having to pull some stuff out of Rackspace and Amazon. So I thought I'd share what I learned. Has anybody done any cloud forensics before? A little bit. Well, it's kind of a pain in the ass. These are some of the things I ran into when grabbing images. First are some of the kind of the scenarios that you have to think about. What if, let's say, a bad guy, or let's say he's a consultant and he switches sides or he quits or whatever, and you lose access to your actual cloud account. I wanted to know, what do I have to do to actually get that access back? Let's say if I get sued or we have some fraud going on or something and we determine that we need to grab images from our account, how do we do that? So some of the things that I found, Amazon and Rackspace make it really easy to get data into the cloud, but it's not necessarily easy to get out. And that's not just bandwidth, but it's also just techniques to pull the data out. So first off, I wanted to see what I had to do, what I had to go through in order to get access back to, my account. If somebody stole my credentials, if, I was the owner of a company, but I wasn't tech savvy, and I just paid someone to set all this stuff up, but they're actually my assets that I own. So I called up Amazon and Rackspace. Neither of them has a procedure that they're willing to share. Basically, they said, we'll help you out if we can. I'm really curious, how easy is it to social engineer myself into getting someone's Rackspace account if I know enough about it, enough about a company? So let's say I'm an accounting person in a company and I know all the billing information. I might know, the name of the old admin. Can I see my way in? Both of them, Amazon said the best practice is to use role-based authentication, and I have a little more info about that in a minute. But Amazon has, everyone knows what Google Authenticator is. You can run on an Android, iPhone. They support two things. With Amazon, you can have a master account, like a God account, and then you can have sub-accounts that you can basically give very granular permissions to, like, individual instances, to individual, like, S3 buckets, to different things like that. But their best practice is to do that. Rackspace says the same thing, but you need to have a managed account with them. If you have, they have like a managed world and a public world. If you have a managed account, they have very mature role-based things. But if you have a kind of like the public, the cheap version, it's very rudimentary what you can do with it. So I actually, while I was writing these slides, I turned out to be sitting next to somebody from Rackspace who kind of gave me some insight into this stuff. So if you work at Rackspace, not if you work at Rackspace, if you have Rackspace, if you have monitoring turned on, if the Rackspace team in a managed account, if those two people have access to your machines and those passwords haven't been changed, if those are changed and your admin credentials are changed, good luck trying to get back in that cloud instance. If they haven't changed the monitoring account, Rackspace will go back in and reset passwords for you. You do need to authenticate as a customer, but they have said that there's been a few public instances where Rackspace has been SE'd and they've given other people access to different accounts. And they say, just like Amazon, the best practice is to really provide, have a God account, and then anyone who's actually doing work in the system to give them, to delegate work to them. All right, so forensics images. So this isn't an easy problem. So the complexity of things like Amazon's EC2, the Rackspace services, as a customer, you don't really get access to the Zen kernel that's running underneath everything. So I wasn't actually planning on talking about Rackspace, but I happened to be sitting next to this girl who worked for Rackspace who kind of presented me this data. So if someone called you up and said, hey, JP, I need you to grab forensic images of our 10 instances running in Rackspace, this is pretty much the procedure that you could follow. The big catch is that you need to provide your own tools to actually pull it out. So if you pause the VM, they, you then actually have to get sign off to their legal and operations team before they'll do anything. So you have to say, we won't hold you accountable. Another thing that came up is that if you don't, let's say it's a Windows instance, and they're going to send you Windows outside of their data center, you have to prove that you have a license for Windows in order to do that. Or if it's Red Hat Enterprise or whatever, like they might say, well, we're not going to do that unless you go buy a license. So it's up to, like I said, it's up to you to have your own strategy to get it out. So you may send them a Go CD, you may have scripts that run DD, whatever the case might be. So it can be a nightmare, like technically and logistically. But one of the things that this girl, Nicole, did say, Nicole Schwartz is the person who helped me out, is that Rackspace prides themselves on their service. So if you have a problem, they'll do what they can. They might not necessarily do it for you, but definitely if you have a managed account, they're going to go above and beyond if they can, if it's within their realm, to help you get it out. So before I get on to the Amazon stuff, one of the things that I ran into when I was pulling data out of the Amazon cloud was geographical zones. So you have, like, the Amazon, just EC2, has, I think, East. There's 2 East regions, I think. There's West, there's an Asia one, and an Ireland one. So if you need to pull data out of all those, and let's say, has anybody ever heard of the Amazon import-export service? So that's basically where you can mail them a hard drive, and they'll actually copy data to you. So if I have, let's say, it's like best practice in the cloud world to have redundancy. So you might have a bunch of servers running, but they're all in different zones, even though then you use Amazon load balancing to kind of, so if you have that lightning storm that kicked off Amazon a couple weeks ago, you could have prevented that if you had set up your Amazon the way they recommend. That's great, but then if all of a sudden you have to do forensics and you have images all over the place and you need to use Amazon's export service, you now have to be sending stuff all over the world. Another problem is a lot of Rackspace for sure, and I'm willing to bet probably Amazon, they won't mail things in between countries. So you would have to actually mail it out and then send it to, send it to a PO. If you're in UK, mail it out, send it to a PO box there, and then actually, you're on your own to get it back to the States or to whoever you need to actually do forensic analysis on it. So this Amazon import-export service, they will import into S3 and EBS. So S3 is basically their HTTP, you can put tons of data there, and then their EBS is what instances run off of, and with a maximum size, the S3 has a maximum size of 5 gigs per file, and then the EBS has a maximum of 1 terabyte per virtual drive. So that creates a whole bunch of problems because I can't send a drive to Amazon and say, hey, I want you to send me all these EBS volumes, right? You actually have to move it to S3 in order to get it out. So so here's the technique that I used to do that. So another point of note that's interesting, but I wasn't able to get an answer on, is that when you do a snapshot in Amazon, it actually saves it to S3, but you can't it's not necessarily like a bucket. So you actually have, you can't actually send them this drive and tell them to export snapshots for you, because that would be ideal. So what I had to do was I took a snapshot of the system. Like, we had a point in time where we said, okay, snapshot everything, and then let the systems keep running for business continuity. But and then when we get the word, we're going to go back later and pull these images out. So what I had to do is Amazon has like an Ubuntu, maybe it's a Debian-based like Amazon image. If you go to launch an instance, it's there. If you boot that up, it has all the tools you need except for this one called AWS, which I'll talk about in a minute. So it has everything you need as a Linux distro to do like funky things with files. So the first thing I had to do is I had to mount this Linux VM to the snapshot. I then had to create another drive in Amazon, and this is like, say, my copy drive or just my temp space. And then I had to format it, and if you have a terabyte drive, to format ext3 on Amazon takes like 20 minutes. So if you have 35 terabyte drives to do, it can be a long process. So then I did just a simple DD command. I didn't actually pipe it to split, but I figured out afterwards. I everybody know what the split command does? It basically will split a file into, multiple chunks. So I split these, I split this image into multiple chunks. So I have, snap dash, whatever the hexadecimal number is, .dd split, and then with a number after it. So now, let's see. This should be here. So there's this tool called AWS by this guy called Tim McKay. And this is the command syntax to actually take a file that's in, that's within your EBS instance and copied over to an S3 bucket. So you could then write a script and use this command and say, look for all these versions of this file and then upload it to S3. And so from that point, you can then mail drives into Amazon, pull them out, and ask them to copy the bucket out. And then you can send it, send it to your lab or whatever, and then you have to reverse the split operation. And then you can now actually, mount a read-only copy and do, forensic analysis on it. And one of the key things that I didn't mention is you need to make sure that you mount that image read-only, just, for forensic integrity. So this slide should have been after the one that I just showed. I've called up Amazon, and they haven't really been helpful in answering questions on how they deal with it. And it's not like I'm a huge cloud user, so they might not just have incentive to talk to me, or who knows. So a couple things I kind of, as I went through the thought process of this, things you might want to ask before you go to the cloud, and you may have a risk of having to go into the forensics world, is will the vendor help you grab forensically sound images, and is there an SLA on that? So if your lawyer says you need to get this stuff, analyzed in the next month, like, is that feasible? Like, if you have, 300 instances running, will the cloud vendor support chain of custody? And that's really important for, admissibility in court. When I was chatting with the Rackspace girl, one of the big things that they will not help anybody forensically until you sign legal disclaimers and all, a whole bunch of basically releasing them from things.
What about taking DD files and encrypting them so that way you have a key, it doesn't matter what happens to the file?
Yeah, that's a good idea. I didn't think of that. Or I didn't get that far, But will they, if the chain of custody is questioned, will they come in and help you defend that?
You won't need to if you can prove that you're the holder of the key. You show how you generated the key, and you're the only keeper of the key in that file, and all the keys you found, you can't be tracked.
Right. So one of the when I went to do this,
You received good enough.
yeah. So when I went to do this, the first thing I did is Google like EC2 forensics, and there's like nothing. Like, two guys wrote an academic paper about this is a really complex problem, but like I didn't really find many solutions out there. So another question I would ask is, are there existing tools that can do this better? And I would love to hear about them. And what I heard from Rackspace and Amazon, if you're the feds, you show up at Amazon and they give you access and they'll let you pull off whatever you need. So, but if I'm just trying to prove something really small, who knows what's going to happen. So that's my presentation. Does anybody have any questions? Does anybody know of any tools that help make this easier? Or is it largely a manual process today?
It's manual, so how to do it.
So,
And there are other ways to lock Rackspace out of their Rackspace instances. You turn off the Ethernet one, you just turn off completely. You'll keep getting annoying emails saying that we can't see your box anymore, but you completely end up locking it out.
well, and one of the things the Rackspace employee told me was that it depends on how good the guy who's locking you out is. You know what I mean? Did he turn off the change passwords on all three of those accounts? Did he block, different things? There's the monitoring account, the Rackspace account, and your
But they use
admin credentials.
private address for management. So if you turn off that private address, they can't get on the box.
So they're unable to go into the other side to access it?
The public one,
Yeah.
obviously you have to put in the same controls that you're doing with all your other instances.
Right. So we were just thinking of if I'm the bad guy, how do I lock Rackspace out if I don't want them to be able to get in? And it seems that the big problem is once the cloud vendor's locked out, like, unless you have a way to like boot up a Linux live CD and reset hashes and different things, that you're kind of SOL.
You kind of SOL on, yeah, you lose the job output and all that stuff, right? But it's the same thing you continue to see regardless,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think so. Like I'm kind of just learning about this stuff. So, all right. Well, thanks for listening, guys.
I have no idea. Boris, if you use the word cyber, you word.
Is there a reason the cable mic's sitting over here?
I'm not using the laptop, so it doesn't matter.
Okay. Please, mic's right there.
I don't have any slides. Was that me? Is that my honey badger? No. Cyber. You want a cyber, baby? You want a cyber?
You're asking.
No. No, I thought you wanted to cyber. You said you wanted to cyber. Shut up.
I'm wondering if you want to.
You ready?
There's another seat space up here.
Andy, I thought you were going to sit up here on the pedestal. You want to sit on the pedestal?
It's tempting. It's tempting.
But I do love Andy's takes on the shirts, I just want to point that out.
Yeah, this is a pretty rad shirt. I mean, the cons suck, but the shirt's awesome.
Sophos? Really?
Blame him.
Yeah, sorry.
They got money.
Yeah. I like money too.
The bad con.
Are you at Sophos? No. Okay.
B-side, it's for nicer.
Yay.
The,
Yay. Okay, so we're ready? We're good? Okay. So I know Dave, how many of you went to Dave's talk, showed you how cool social engineering toolkit is and how everybody's stupid, click shit, whatever, right? So no, it's not about not clicking shit. So I've actually put together a new architecture from the whole BYOD thing, right? Everybody wants to jump on the BYOD bandwagon. Everybody thinks that's the coolest thing since sliced bread, whatever. Everybody's doing BYOD wrong. Right now when we're looking at BYOD, we're looking at implementing mobile devices for messaging. We're looking at calendaring, docs, right? Everybody wants to use their shiny iPads or shiny iPhones or whatever to get onto the corporate network. We're not really changing anything from your work-at-home program, right? The same way you provide remote access for your remote users, it should be the same thing that you're doing to your mobile users. Android, iOS, even I guess no Windows Mobile doesn't support the standard VPN clients yet, but you can always do SSL VPN, right? So I think the biggest problem is it's not the technology is not there to provide mobile users to do the whole bring your own device thing. It's the back end piece. So nobody's actually gone through doing their classification, your remote access. A lot of companies that give remote access, once you log in, you're God. You're on the network, do whatever the hell you want. How is that different than the user sitting in your organization? Just because you bought them their machines, you end up trusting them. I don't know if you're a Microsoft shop, you're a Unix shop, however you do your authentication, you trust your corporate network just because you bought the devices. But why do we put all that trust into those machines? Because we bought them? We don't know. We roll out AV, we roll out group policies, we roll out all the local crap. We spend tons of money securing the endpoints, securing USB, doing everything that regulations tell us to do, everything that best practices tell us to do, everything that the vendors tell us to do. And then Dave writes a new script and everything gets through it, right? So guys, on your machine now. The one key thing that I think most organizations aren't properly doing is the whole data classification thing. They don't know what access you have, where to concentrate your budget, how to lock down your environment so it makes sense. So I'm working on it. I'm actually working on design. I'm going to have the AccuVant guys do a pen test from an external side to do a proof of concept for us. We're building it from scratch, so I'm going to put the same trust in my corporate users as I'm going to put into anyone on the internet. I don't give a shit if you're sitting in my office or you're coming in from the internet. I don't care if you're in an iPad, iPhone, Android, whatever. The only way into production is VPN. If you're looking at if you're looking at like Cisco, I'm only going to talk Cisco because they have a commercial solution. During the talk that I'm going to give at T2 InfoSec, DerbyCon, and I guess SecZone, I'm going to be pushing out I'm going to be pushing out the design based on all open source tools. So you can do it OpenVPN, you can do it Open LDAP, OpenVPN. So there are going to be commercial versions. I'm just going to talk real quickly about the Cisco ASA implementation. So Cisco's actually rolled out a really cool product called a really cool application. Well, I guess it's more of a protocol. So they have something called DAP, which essentially creates dynamic access firewall rules for your user account. So if your LDAP is properly set up, you should only be able to access what you have permission to access. So if you've gone through your data classification, right, set up your LDAP groups right. That's the big thing, right? You guys take a step back, do your basics. Once you do your basics, who gives a shit if they're using an iOS, right? It's the same program. You're going to treat everything as hostile in your production network. Your production environment will only be accessed through two-factor authentication. So we got two-factor authentication. We have issues with two-factor authentication because a lot of organizations think that a certificate is two-factor. That can be grabbed off the wire, right? So you need to look at your environment completely. I can finish in like 5. I don't have my slides, so sorry. Hey, Adrian. How are you? You have anything to say? You want to say hello? You say hi. Don't cuddle me.
Nothing to say.
Awkward. So, like I said, when we do this at Derby, I'm going to push out all the tools and all the configurations, everything you need to do. For two-factor authentication, how many of you guys use two-factor auth for your email? What do you use? So who uses Google? Who uses two-factor authentication for your Google Mail? Yeah. So who has the two-factor authentication tool on their phone? Has anybody actually replaced their PAM shell with to require two-factor auth? Because I told you about it.
No, that is not true.
I actually told him about it too.
You didn't tell me about it.
I told you about it.
No way.
That's what the front row is about. Is shit that
Whatever. Okay. Okay. Hold on. We'll talk about them later. So, Google actually provides the PAM replacement for you. You can replace all of your SSH sessions to require that two-factor authentication. Just look how much relief you put off the stupid end users with their dumb passwords and password 1, 2, 3, 4. You're not spending any money. You're replacing one file in your configuration. You're not going to cost your organization anything, and this is outside of VPN. We're not even talking about VPN. The implementation I'm going to be talking about is actually integrating the Google two-factor auth for your LDAP and for your ASA and for your TACACS and your radius authentication. So I am going to. Obviously, I don't have any slides. I just figured I'd come up and talk about the preview. But essentially, I'm going to treat my corporate network as hostile. Then remote access and work from home and bring your own device, none of that shit matters anymore. Raf, his whole cloud bullshit, nobody's going to care. And I'm just saying, right? It doesn't matter from that perspective, because you don't trust. You're going to trust the end users, right? And when you start doing real two-factor authentication with real VPN, I'm not talking about an SSL VPN. I'm talking about real IPsec VPN. So Dave's got control of your box. He can't talk to anything once that machine establishes the VPN. Right? You can push your own policies to the endpoint once they establish the VPN connection. It's like back to basics. Nobody talks about this because we're all buying Blinky Box bullshit. We're buying DLP. So DLP, there's tons of tools out there for DLP, right? Tons. Everybody's got a DLP solution. Any of you guys seen the article the other day? So people are doing exfiltration via cookies, via URLs, via DNS calls. None of your DLP solutions are going to catch that. And so I'm sure all of you have IDS rolled out, but your IDS is useless because you're sitting there looking at noise all day. Now you have an actual whitelist of legitimate stuff that should be coming from your corporate network. You're not spending money. You're not spending any more time doing anything. It's like brain dead, right? We're sitting here thinking, like, why haven't we done this before? It's production environment, desktop environment. So someone comes in with malware on their laptop. And I'm going to take a step back. I'm not advocating anybody bringing their home machines. I really think I don't think there's any productivity gains. I don't think there really is any cost benefit of people bringing their own desktops. I think the desktops, laptops, whatever. Obviously, it depends on your organization, but we're never going to see that in the big five, especially like finance and regulated stuff. So let's take a step back, I guess. So from the regulated stuff, how many of you work in regulated organizations? You have people working on stuff on their desktops, right, locally. Do you apply any of the required controls to those desktops? You don't. Nobody does. Nobody does. So accounting, look at HR, look at accounting, HR, payroll, all those guys. They have spreadsheets on their desktops with employee names, socials, all that shit, right? But you're not applying any of the controls that you should be applying that you would be applying to the same data that if it lived in production. There's none of that data should ever hit your endpoints. Then you don't care about USB, you don't care about malware, you don't care about any of that shit because it doesn't live there. So the reason I mentioned the Cisco solution, Cisco has something called their Secure, with AnyConnect, you can roll out Secure Desktop. Secure Desktop, okay, it's Java, it's whatever, shut up. You can run everything within that console. You can turn off copy and paste, everything can run in that virtual machine. So even if their machine was popped, even if they got 0867, whatever the fuck they have running on their machine, it doesn't matter anymore. You take all the trust off of the endpoint, you treat them as internet users. And since you're doing this with Cisco's solution through a secure desktop piece, we're not just doing web apps. It has nothing to do with web apps. Okay, I guess we're done. So come see you at the DerbyCon in Helsinki. Any questions? I guess. I do not work for Cisco. Cisco has these products available already, but I do have an implementation with open source tools that is actually a little bit better than the Cisco solution. Cisco actually, the only reason I would recommend the Cisco solution, if you have commercial support, which nobody's going to be able to ever get it into your environment without that commercial support, right? You have commercial support, plus they can do malware on the wire. So now your corporate network, not the production one, your desktop network, you could do malware analysis on the wire. Anything else? And no, I don't work for Cisco.
Where do you work?
I work for the Fed. My name is Nicholas. Anything else? Okay, guys, thank you. I applaud you.
Yeah, it's formal. I mean, it's cooler now that you're leaving, but
Yeah, this thing looks like stepped on.
it's very easy to find out where I work.
Has anyone talked to the resolution? Not yet. Okay. 1020. Whatever you got already. Being brave.
What's the talk gonna be on? It's good.
That's a bit optimistic. Whether that downloads.
Which one should we start?
Ideally, if you want the recording to be best, 1020, that one. Yeah. And then add your hertz. Have you got any options we can do it? How is it on there? I can't remember on bloody Ubuntu. It's not showing us, so that'll probably work anyway. And just before you start talking, can you move the slides forward one slide and then back one slide? That gives a nice sync and we can make things all work. Hey, you're right.
That's the wrong slide, so. ERCOT.
All right. So a friend of mine and I decided to, for our data mining class, mine some data. I'm Brian, also known as Factor, and I'm on part of Acme Pharmaceuticals we play CTF. Okay, so everybody knows social networks everywhere. We don't really need to describe that. The interesting thing about social network is this thing being sold is data. Everybody has some interest in the data. The end users want to keep their data secure. You've got people that want to buy the data to market stuff to you, and you've got the actual social network who has the data and wants to make money by selling it. There are things that, like the end user does want to keep your own data secure, like who am I connected to, what information am I sharing out. But there arises a problem when I think stuff that should be secure for me, not everybody else has that same opinion. So here's a little sample network that I've drawn up showing kind of how I'm going to explain stuff. So we have a victim, Uday, here, and so the arrows indicate a following or a follow mechanism. We have a follow, so like myself, I'm following Larry. Larry follows me. Or I follow Larry, I follow Milos. I am stalked by Larry, I am stalked by Milos. Just fun names. We talk about the distance of being away from somebody as our Bacon number. AKA the 7 degrees is Kevin Bacon. And so like with the Uday being the victim, Andre, Kevin, and Milos all have a Bacon of 1, where Scott, Larry, and myself all have a Bacon level of 2. With the inference problem, in this case, the social network that I decided to attack was Twitter. And the problem with Twitter is that somebody can lock down their account so you can't see who their friends are, who's friends with them, but not everybody's that way. So if you lock down your account, but your friend doesn't, I can look at your friend's account and see that they're friends with you. So we do have a gate there that is easily bypassed. So I had a friend who has a locked account. I did ask his permission, and so I did know one follower, and so we were trying to see what it would take to try to enumerate all of the connections out. These are a lot of the tools we used. MySQL, I just needed some place to store all my data. Python, we used the Tweepy API interface. GraphViz and Tulip, these are some data imaging tools. We'll show you some pictures later. And we needed some computational power and multiple IP addresses. Amazon Cloud. Okay, so here's the pretty pictures. This one's done by Tulip. What the purple lines are is we've actually highlighted the victims here at this point, and these are all the connections into it. Every line that you see is another connection, either to or from. And the way that Tulip lines it out is somebody who has a lot of connections is going to be at the center of a hub. So you see like these different circles here, there. And actually I found that one really interesting. You just have all these different connections to it. And this is, when you zoom in, that's all we did on this one, is we zoomed in further. And that entire line that you saw is actually a bunch of these other circles. What I've done here is I actually took all my data sets and I just cut it down to 1/10 of the size, just so we can take a look and figure things out. And I've color-coded stuff. So the blue dot right there, that is the victim themselves. People that are green are people that have a connection to the victim and that I know about. So I've already mapped that connection out. People that are in yellow have a connection to the victim. They're in my database on the queue to be mapped out, but I hadn't got there yet. And then the 3 that you see that are in red, they are connections to the victim that have yet to be identified. So we spent 1 week of human time doing this. In this time, we were able to look. We were able to get 800,000 nodes into our database with 1,700,000 edges. That's the connection between the nodes. So we had 800,000 individual or accounts with 1.7 million connections mapped out, and we'd only walked 1,500 nodes, 1,600 nodes. Just kind of a comparison, Lady Gaga at that time had just shy of 17 million followers. But these are the interesting numbers that we came up with. So for the victim, he had 376 followers. We knew of 96 of them, and we'd actually followed and made that connection with 96 of them. We had 256 more of them in our database to walk. We just hadn't got there yet. And 24 were left unknown. With friends, we had, he has 283. We walked 118 of them and had 158 left with 7 unknown. So in total, we knew 30% of his friends and followers. We had 60% in our database. We just didn't give it enough time to get there. And so we had about 95% of his connections in there. We figured that given enough time, we probably would have edged that up. There may have been a couple edge cases that you would not have been able to get. The only case I can think of that is where you have 2 people with locked accounts. You're not going to be able to look and see that they are connected to each other. Some of the future work, speed up the data acquisition. This is going to include like adding more nodes on the Amazon cluster. We actually had to start figuring out smarter ways to walk nodes. I let it run for 24 hours. On what we were doing is we tried to get closer nodes first, and Jerry Seinfeld actually made a close enough node that I wasted 24 hours looking at all of Jerry Seinfeld's connections. It was too much chaff, not enough information. One of the other things that we want to look at some point is actually trying to compare information from Twitter to other social networking sites, maybe like Facebook and Twitter, and just try to start mapping out different connections that way as well. So, any questions? Bueller. Oh.
My question was
Ow. Okay. So.
what's the big so what?
The big so what was, we've all talked about that. We've talked about this a lot. But I haven't actually seen anybody that has actually done this type of work, to figure out how easy it was. The thing that we used on the API that I glossed over that I should have mentioned was the API that we used to do all this stuff was all unauthenticated. So it was an anonymous user that was doing all the mapping out. And so I did actually use my account to get some information so I could actually look at what the anonymous got compared to what reality was.
What can I do to protect myself?
The problem is, if you want to use social networking, there's nothing that you can do to protect yourself. You know this fact, but also know the fact that your mom's going to wish you a happy birthday on your birthday on Facebook, and everybody's going to see it. That's happened to me. I've had to say, I've gone through to delete things of, please don't wish me happy birthday on my birthday, because that means everybody knows when my birthday is. But knowledge is also power. If you know it exists, then you can try to mitigate the best you can around it. You know, just sticking your head in the sand isn't, you know, it's more of just knowing that it exists. Now what? So, what's that? And yeah, you know, actually, I wrote the rule I put is if you have more than X amount of followers, I just chaffed you out because it was too much signal to noise to signal, whatever. Yeah. So, you know, and there, you know, I mean, this was a very stupid method of actually collecting the data. You know, at some point we could have tried to tune it and be a little more smart on that. So, I think that's my time, and thanks a lot, guys.
Room gets smaller every talk. It's like that.
All right, so lightning talks. I saw the board. It was pretty empty, and then I came here after I signed up, and I'm like, oh shit, people have slides. Yay. So basic idea of my talk, I was calling it, but you didn't persuade me. And so here's the background of how I got to give this in the first place. When I was a little kid, I thought security was cool. I'd go to the library and check out books on physical security and fencing and security lighting and everything. And then I discovered computing and computing security. And then I told my school district that they need to fix their security, and they didn't like that. So I found other places to play with security. I come here, you know, to DEF CON for about 4 years now, and I came to B-Sides last year. And Raphael Loss is giving this talk last year about convincing people to have security. And I'm like, you know what? That's an interesting problem. And I spent like the past year thinking about it. And I wish I'd gotten further. But because that's the thing with an interesting problem. It stays an interesting problem. It's not necessarily easy to solve. So Jeff Atwood of Stack Overflow fame writes in his blog a couple days ago about trying to convince people. And he takes this quote from a movie. And I can't remember the movie, but go to Coding Horror. Do read the article. It's really great. And he says, you know, the character in the movie says, but you should have told me not to do this horrible, stupid thing. And the guy says, but I did. He says, but you did not persuade me. And welcome to security. We told you not to do that. And then you just were like, okay, well, I don't want to spend the money on it, so we'll get to it. We won't get to it. Whatever, have a nice day. And now we're dealing with politics. And I wanted to say originally that you're up against stupid, which is what it usually feels like, but sometimes it's not. Maybe you're up against narcissism. Maybe they're brilliant, but they just feel like they know more than you. Maybe they're, and there's all sorts of ways you can boil it down, but the idea that it comes down to is that people don't want to put time into that because investment is expensive. So now we come around to you need to be a fire department. And when you say you need to be a fire department, people think of, oh, 911, we got hacked and, you know, come put out the fire. But the fire department is a lot more than that. You know, you have big expensive apparatus that's laying around, and most of the time it's idle, and it should be. And you're doing things like checking that the plumbing still works and the fire hydrants still flow, and then we know how much is there. You know, it's pre-planning, it's drills, it's infrastructure. And fire departments in modern history are relatively new because you don't get fire departments until you feel the pain. Until an entire city burns down, well, then we rebuilt it. My hometown's Portland, Maine. our models resurgam because we burned to the ground 4 times. And IT security is like that. You know, companies burn to the ground. Or if they don't burn to the ground, they at least lose enough that it's embarrassing. And the financial costs aren't necessarily there every time yet, but sometimes they're there if it's banking, and sometimes they're coming if it's fines and the like. So the first thing I think is, you know, from that perspective, is encouraging the existence of your fire department by showing somebody the pain that they might feel if they haven't already felt it and been convinced. But even then, you end up with a question of, well, we've got a fire department, but we need to cut some money out of the budget because economy, blah, blah, more profits, shareholders, whatever the excuse is. So now you're up to a question of leverage. How are we going to keep you from cutting our money? And I'm going to pause for 2 seconds so I know how fast I'm moving and get a clock up there, because the clock in the back of the room has disappeared again. Yay! So I started to think of how do we describe leverage, and I thought of putting together buzzwords and synergy and blah, 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 but it is kind of, you know, horribly that. Find other departments, people, organizations, whatever it is that are already moving in the direction you want, whether they know it or not. Legal is usually one for this. You can't do that because I'm a lawyer and no. Make friends with them. And now we've gotten to the political thing, and it's subversion. And dear God, it's starting to look like everything that's not fun in security. I didn't get into this to mess with people. I wanted to play with computers, and this became the problem. But it's the problem that we face to get security to work effectively. The technical part is the fun part. But the fun part can be frustrating if you don't make any progress. And this is kind of, I think, the sad and depressing part that we need in order to make our jobs easier and to ultimately be effective. So, 10 minutes, okay. So the question is now, who is bigger, legal or whatever other department? But also at the same time, in blunter terms, who already has management by the balls? Because sometimes persuasion is not nice words. Sometimes it's a little very painful twist. So we're doing what we're talking about now, I guess, in a way, when I get through all these different ideas of how do we get there, is security is infrastructure. And that's kind of a weird statement in a way. You know, we think of security as, I don't know, what do we think of security as? I want to take like 30 seconds and get somebody's thoughts on that. Anybody's thoughts on that? Bueller. Reusing the last presentation, yes. But when you look at security, all right, so if you look at security as infrastructure, and you want good infrastructure, you have to have defined parts that are going to be there. You know, these are the areas that I'm focusing on. This is what's happening. And the way I stopped and thought about what kind of infrastructure can I compare it to. Power lines don't really work. Water doesn't really work. Natural gas. Natural gas is good because when you get natural gas raw, houses disappear off the face of the earth. Usually in ways that make the news and cool photos. So from natural gas infrastructure, you are laying down piping and you are laying down monitoring because you want to make sure that your gas is flowing, and you know as soon as the gas is flowing somewhere besides your pipes, your information, whatever. But there's one catch. When you put down this infrastructure, you don't get to own the pumps. So the pressure might go really high or really low, and the volume's going to vary, and you don't know what's coming down the line. So when I start thinking, you know, how am I going to describe security to somebody else and get investment buy-in, the best thing I can think of to try and tell somebody about it who's not in the field, who's not related to security, but who needs to know it, is natural gas. We have pipelines for your data, and they're going to go boom. And with that comes a lot of preventative maintenance. And then it comes to selling preventative maintenance and saying, all right, so we have these systems here, and we need to convince you that now we've convinced you to put them in place because, you know, natural gas is good and we can make streetlights with it. Oh crap, there's electricity. We lost our streetlights. You know, whatever you convince people to do. Then you get to the point of saying we have to maintain it. And that comes down to convincing people that the expense of security is worth more to spend now than the pain of getting owned later. And I feel like that kind of loops back in a way to we're back at feel the pain. And this is where it starts to go in my head and where I am with the idea of it. We know what we have to convince people of. And we come here and we come to the conferences and we come to talks and we focus on, if you write it this way, it's going to be broken. And if you do these things, it's going to hurt. And then every new year, your company gets a new wave of coders or whatever you've got going on, and they're all new, and somehow they don't know what SQL injection is, even though it's 15 years old. And we start with that same wave again. So we spent all this time and we research new things and we get slides and presentations, and then we go out and see what's getting owned, and it's the same stuff, and nobody comes up here and does a presentation about SQL injection anymore because we all know it. Or we do kind of a cool presentation, like we look at PLC systems, SCADA, whatever, and hey, these systems are vulnerable now. But the vulnerabilities are still kind of the same. We're one step removed. Now it's not SQL injection. It's vulnerable, but it's vulnerable because you didn't secure it. You didn't use proper authentication. You didn't encrypt everything. And so security, I don't know. I've lost the fun part of it there and like having this lightning talk. But I think that that's the direction that we need to go, is getting outside of the security field a bit, finding people who are responsible for the systems we're doing, because anything that we ever build, we don't build it to be secure. I mean, even if you take a look at the concept of a prison, prisons are built with security in mind. They are focused on something. But that goal is not to be a wall. It is to be a wall that contains something in a livable environment. You don't get Facebook, you don't get Twitter, you don't get anything fun by saying, these are the rules and we're going to follow this as the first thing. But you still need that infrastructure. Finding that balance, walking away from my no slide, 15-minute lightning talk, 10-minute lightning talk, we'll see how this goes, and thinking not so much when you go home, we need this DLP device, we need, because I want to come up with something good in security to talk about besides, firewalls. We've had firewalls forever. Segmentation of processes, if you want good infrastructure, not just adding on the next product, but the next thing that's going to be there, why isn't sandboxing in Windows? I've gone off on a tangent, but when I open up my browser, why does my browser have permissions to read or write to anywhere as if it were the same user as me? Why isn't that linked off? Is there a way I can get that kind of investment in infrastructure? Individually, can I pay that off? Who can I convince to make this something worthwhile to create? How do you convince people?
Money drives.
Well, that's the thing. You can convince people with FUD and trolling. And how do you, and going back to when I mentioned politics earlier, I ran for the state house once. I don't know why I did that, but you look at national politics or everything, it's not constructive evaluation, it's not explaining things, and maybe security is like that. And maybe that's the solution we come to, is just to make dark stormy clouds because we know better, but then I start feeling like we're the TSA of the IT world if we as a community start doing that, where, oh, dark clouds, we're not going to focus on why, but, can we pat you down? I was hoping that was a question rather than a timer. So I've got a couple minutes left, but I've kind of exhausted what I've got for direction. So does anybody have any thoughts on this? Does anybody have any struggles of, what are you doing in your job professionally to make security easier for you to implement? What do you run into that gets you stuck? How do you get out of that? How do you not get out of that?
Are you really asking these as non-rhetorical questions?
These are non-rhetorical questions. I want something.
Do you think there's going to be an answer within like a sentence or two to this?
No, I don't. I don't at all. I've been thinking about this problem for a while. Last year I was like, oh, this is a cool problem. I'd love to come up with solutions for it. I haven't come up with solutions for it. I haven't heard anybody come up with solutions for it.
I mean, security is a philosophy. It's not infrastructure, it's not product, it's not process, it's not people, it's all of that. It's the concept.
Security is in many ways a mindset. It is about who you are and how you think about things and taking that right approach. Absolutely. How does it manifest itself in a way that works? You know, security has to be doing things within that mindset of certain bounds of, okay, if I, follow this, then, I won't get SQL injection because I've bound my variables. You should do that every time. That's infrastructure in a way of piping, I should use this piping that won't leak and cause people's houses to blow up, and I should use it every time. And you don't want somebody to go out and get something that's like quarter-inch cast iron pre-rusted stuff and lay that down instead, which is what SQL injection is pre-rusted pipe, boom. So it is a mindset to implement it, but it isn't, I think, and I'm proposing it, don't take it as, hey, he said that and he's an idiot, but I think that the manifestation of that, what you see as a result, is an infrastructure. I've got 60 seconds left, and I don't feel like rambling off to the end, so if anyone wants to say anything else or give me some other direction, I think.
I think your ultimate challenge is making the appropriate business case and focusing on companies and on businesses. And simply put, they don't necessarily see the necessity of or the appropriateness of adding security to the hill. So the ultimate question is how much is enough? And it's more than just for spend, but resources and everything else you can provide.
Oh, yeah, it's... Yeah, it's cost benefit, and when you can't figure out the cost benefit, that's what FUD is for. I want to be better than FUD, but maybe that's the answer. Maybe.
Instead of wholesale FUD, the term that we've used, and I've used in the past with customers, is the CNN moment. And as opposed to saying, all this bad stuff's going to happen to you, you ask the question is, what's the risk of the headline on CNN being, 150,000 passwords leaked from, your company? And that's how you drive that value proposition.
You need targeted FUD.
So now I get good discussion, and I've also got the stop sign. Where were you 5 minutes ago, man?
Let's all give our good friend a hand. I'd say this isn't as easy as it looks, but it really is. You just stand up here and you talk a little bit about something that interests you, and that's the fun part. That's what you're doing. That's all I'm doing. I'm just going to stand up here and talk about things that I like. And if all y'all don't like the same things, then I don't care. Yeah. I just got to get the damn thing screwed in so it doesn't fall out first. Not really much of a table here, you know what I mean? Can't even support the cable very well. I can totally support better resolutions than that.
So we're talking about Pinto being dead. It's only appropriate we're doing that in a chapel.
The fact that I have not burst into flames is astounding. Here, hold on, let me get up here near the altar. Ouch. That thing is hot. All right. So for the two of you who don't know who I am, I'm Zero Chaos, and if you have ever been on IRC, I'm sure I've kicked you and you deserved it, and I'm not sorry. So thanks for coming anyway. I'm going to talk about a project that nobody's ever heard of, and the few of you that have heard of it have thought that it has been dead forever, and it really kind of has been, because we call it a live CD, and we only really kick out a live CD every 2 or 3 years, but we'll get on to the point. You can tell that my PowerPoint skills are awesome, because I have set random changes. I also have about 43 slides to get through, so we're going to do this real quick. And Travis Goodspeed's after me, and I want to sit down and watch him, so you can all ask me questions after Travis is talking. All right. Pen 2 isn't dead. We've never been dead. We don't make a lot of releases that is very accurate, but the installed users get literally dozens of updates every week, right? New security tools come out. We put those right in the distro, right in the repositories. People use them. And no matter what you think, just because we don't update the website doesn't mean we're not here. When you read my obituary, Pen 2's dead, okay? Until then, I'm going to do this, okay? We were founded in 2005 by a guy named Gremlin. He is awesome. Built this on Gentoo Linux because we love Gentoo Linux. He used GNOME for the window manager. I originally had a duck now note in here to myself because I first gave this at ShmooCon, but since all of you aren't armed and there's a lot less of you, I'm good to go. Okay, who am I? Gentoo developer, Gentoo zealot, Wi-Fi hacker. Joined Pen 2 in 2006 when they switched to a window maker that didn't suck. So what do? I used to do the things that are on this list, and then Gremlin went and got himself married and had a kid. So now I do what's on this list and what's not on this list because I just don't really have a lot of help. We got a small team of guys. Most open source projects have an average of 3 developers, and we actually have a whole 2.5. So we're really getting close to that magical 3 number. I'm super happy. So for those of you that just heard us today, yeah, that's about what I'd expect. Okay, so let me just a little bit of fun here. Timeline for when Linux distros were released. Okay, WAPX, Auditor, and Wax were released. And they formed Backtrack after a while, and everybody knows that. But what you mostly don't know is that we actually made our first release before Backtrack existed. So all the people that said, well, why'd you do this? Backtrack's so great. It's because we were first. Why'd they bother? That's my question. Okay? Seriously, though, go look it up yourself. These numbers came off DistroWatch. I didn't actually pull it out of my ass. Okay? Why did we do this? Okay? There weren't really any general pen testing distros, right? Wax, Auditor, and WAPX are great tools for their individual areas, but most of them weren't really widespread use. So we wanted something that worked for everything. And then we wanted very up-to-date tools. And those of you that run Debian Stable, you'll see this talk in about 3 years when it makes it into Debian Stable. Yeah, it's kind of a problem, right? Even you're running Debian Unstable or you're running Ubuntu. Just the fact of running something called unstable is unsettling to me, but Okay, the most important reason, because Gentoo is awesome, right? We were all Gentoo users to start with. We started building it on what we know because it's what's comfortable, and we felt that it gave us the most flexibility, and you'll all laugh at me, but this is what Gentoo is, okay? It's not a Linux distribution. Okay? Gentoo is what we call a meta distribution because there's so many choices. Every package is compiled by a preference. So when you use Debian or you use Ubuntu or any pre-compiled distro, whatever the package maintainer thinks is the right thing to do, that's what happens on your system. You do not get the choice. Do you like Pulse Audio? Oh, that's tough luck because you're going to get Pulse Audio. The Jack Audio Connection Kit, super useful, right? Well, if you run Ubuntu, you must think that it is, right? In Gentoo, you pick whatever you want, okay? Very up-to-date. Catalyst build system is what Gentoo uses to kick out live CDs, and I absolutely love it right up until June 21st when they completely broke the entire system, stopped building new stages, and the live CDs cannot be generated. So I was going to release a beta at DEF CON, and I am totally not going to release a beta at DEF CON. There will be one by the end of August. So if this actually tickles your fancy, keep track of our blog and our website, and I swear to God it will be there. And goal is DerbyCon, I'll have a release, okay? Though I'll have to stop going to cons. Example Catalyst spec file, this is what we build off of, right? It's really simple. You tell it what the architecture is, versioning information you want. The profile is what determines, how new your tools are, how old your tools are, whether you want hardened Linux or not. All the compile flags set up by us to decide how to best tune the hardware to get as much optimization as possible without ruining it for all the people that have old, crappy hardware. And then this is what an e-build is. This is what all of the packages are generated off of. So basically, Gentoo downloads the source and then follows this really essentially a bash script to download it, unpack it, apply the needed patches, and configure it as you see fit, build it, and install it to your system. So it's all handled magically, right? This isn't, BSD port system. You don't go into a directory and type make. You just say emerge ettercap. It'll automatically grab all the dependencies, compile them as you see fit, and install them to your system. It's actually really, really simple. Okay? That's totally out of order. So focus, right? Lightweight. We use less than 100 megs of RAM right now when we're idle. Compare that to anything else and laugh. Up-to-date system, 3.4.2 kernel. Wi-Fi is actually at a kernel 3.5, so it just got released. More up-to-date tools. Best of the best is what we go for, right? We do not want a 9 gig distro just because everybody's got a DVD burner now, right? You really do not need 1,000 different web app scanners. You need the ones that don't suck, right? And I know that's a little difficult for the noobs to figure out, and that's what we're here for. We talk to the people that actually do this for a living, and then we put the good tools in the repos, okay? But is that really so different from everybody else? Yeah, it really is, because all the choices are for you. Okay, we have an option for normal or hardened Linux right now. So you can decide to have a Linux that is completely hardened against attack, or you can decide to not. Okay, what's the difference? Not hardening it means it's possibly 5–10% faster. However, when Wireshark has a new exploit out, like they did 2 days ago, or when ShmooCon opened up last year, or, God, pick your random week, right? There's so many exploits against these boxes, and here we are just popping and running as root when anybody could take over your box, okay? Don't get me started on the guys that don't change root Tor as their password. That's just a different problem, right? Each set of attacks is completely optional, right? So once you install the system, if you are a Wi-Fi guy only, you can tell us just to install the Wi-Fi tools. We'll keep those up to date and nothing else. We'll drop everything else out. You'll have a very small distribution. You don't have to download packages that you don't use, right? Or any variant, you know, so I do Wi-Fi and web app pen testing or forensics or whatever. Any and all options are there. And then my personal favorite, which I spent a lot of time on, is we have an option between being leading edge and bleeding edge. Okay, what's the difference? Well, one of them hurts. Honestly, that is the difference. And this terminology is correct, right? Leading edge is, here is the latest release of something that I bothered to test and kicked out to you, right? Bleeding edge builds from the version control system every time there's an update. Okay, you want the latest and greatest Metasploit? No problem. You tell us to use the bleeding edge software and you will get the latest and greatest Metasploit every single time there's a commit to their repo. You'll get the new commit. Okay, lots of fun. And it's not just Metasploit. I mean, everybody does an SVN up on Metasploit and it's no big deal. But I mean, this is, you know, Kismet, Ubertooth, you know, GNU Radio right now is making a lot of changes for the RTL SDR chipsets. So I mean, all kinds of stuff you can grab right from version control every day. Okay. What is coming soon? 32-bit support. When I took over, I had no ability to do any building at all, and I've kind of been building that up from scratch on this laptop right here. So if you've ever tried to kick out a live CD release that you hand compiled on a i5, you'll remember that your laptop got a little warm and it took a few hours. So your old crappy hardware has not been a priority. I'm super sorry if you have a 32-bit device. We're aiming for full ARM support. I've got a guy working on it right now for both soft and hard float devices. So if you have one of those pieces of junk like a Raspberry Pi, I still don't care. But if you have something nice like a Pony Plug, we can definitely help you out, okay? OpenBTS is something we're adding in right now as well for all the fun cell phone hacking that people have been up to recently. So who is this really for, right? I wrote this in AirDrop format for a friend of mine just to make him laugh when I originally wrote this. So we accept anybody, right? We accept everybody. People without free time need not apply, okay? Right now, Gentoo is just a source-based distribution. I'm aiming after the next release to actually distribute binary packages. However, building on my i5 right now is just not going to make that fly. So don't really care about criminals, and people who think that the whirling cube desktop is more important than password crackers, you can also stay at home. Hold on, some of these are a little bit out of order. There we go. Okay, so questions, but I'm not really going to take any questions because Travis is probably going to be here in a few minutes and want to set up. This is all the pertinent information, the website, the blog, me, and the Twitter account. This is all done for fun, but I do like to have a lot of fun, so I'm going to tell you all the very best reason ever to use Pen2. People won't make fun of you for being an Ubuntu user. Thank you. Thank you. Was that lightning enough? Yeah, that's fine. I can take questions while we're waiting for the next guy because I'm standing here anyway. So if anybody has a question, you're welcome to ask. Would you like to be Travis? You can stand up here and tell us you're Travis. Oh, that's okay. Just make it up. Just say neighborly a lot and nobody will know the difference. So how many of you use Backtrack on a daily basis? Oh, that's encouraging. How many of you have heard about Pen2 before today? I got 3, 4, 5. That's great. How many of you have ever booted it on a device? All right, 1. Sweet. So it's me and you. That's great. That's fixed now. Oh, you're next? I thought Travis was on it right after me. No? Okay, cool. Well, you're welcome to take over then. I don't really need my last 15 seconds anyway.
No, I don't have any slides or anything, so I'm doing this kind of impromptu. Because, I mean, I know I'm not the first person without slides today. If this works, this works. I'm happy to play along whatever the rules are. So. So howdy. My name is Jonathan Katz. I am a security operations analyst for a company called MetaNet, doing SIM stuff. Been in information security, been in IT for too long, probably like most people here. I'm here to talk about why the heck are we still using syslog and some of the inherent problems with that for any SIM environment. So here, who here does SIM? Who here knows SIM? Okay, so I don't have to do like a full explanation of what the heck SIM is because, got to know my audience, right? So whatever your SIM is, whether it's ArcSight, whether you're using Splunk, whether you're using LogRhythm or LogLogic, you're feeding it full of data, and most likely a good chunk of your data is coming in via syslog. And this isn't your choice. How do you get your Cisco logs, Cisco PIC, Cisco ASA, all that stuff? That's all syslog. Half of the other firewalls that are out there, Juniper, syslog. And it goes on. All your legacy Unix stuff, syslog. Oracle's DBA auditing, syslog. And it's not up to us. This protocol's been around since 1984, BSD 4.3, or 4.2. It's been around that long. It's been unencrypted UDP, and it's been coming across the wire, and it's getting scooped up by your SIM. So the problem is, it's unencrypted UDP that's going across the wire, and anyone can inject and do what the heck they want to what's coming into your environment, whether we like it or not. Now, some of us actually have the time and have gone through and wrapped, changed your syslog setups to being TCP, wrapping it in SSL, keeping it safe and secure. But 99% of the enterprises out there, they don't have the time to do it, they don't have the effort, they don't have the personnel, and it's something that's so low and so technical and seems to be such minutia for people, they just don't have the effort to put forth or can get the time or the hours or whatever they need. And at the same time, a lot of vendors don't even support that to begin with. So no matter what you try, you're trying to make these corrective actions and you just can't do it. So when this comes into SIM, one of the great things that SIM has done is it's given this categorization in this schema, is that you're mapping all of these disparate events to a standard schema. So an IP address is an IP address, a host name is a host name, a system is a system, an attack is an attack, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in doing this, to make it simple for new vendors to integrate, guys like ArcSight came up with Ceph, which is common event format, which is a common event format, a common schema for naming events. MITRE came up with CEE, which is also a similar way of doing that, and other SIMs take advantage of that. The problem is we're now going back to our unencrypted UDP syslog. So think about how easy it is to craft one of those packets to fit the schema. And the schema, the wonderful thing, the double-edged sword of the schema is that it's system agnostic. And we can roll our eyes at the terminology agnostic, but you can tell the schema that it's any vendor because it's coming in via syslog. It doesn't care what it is, but you can say it's coming from Checkpoint, it's coming from Cisco, it's coming from whatever as this parsed event that fits your schema. So now, with our open syslog infrastructure, we have the ability to push events into your SIM and into your environment that are coming from devices that you have, and we can pretend they're the devices that you have. So now you're having, let's say you're PCI compliant, and you have cardholder data over here, and you have your non-cardholder data over there, and you're not supposed to talk to one another. But someone doesn't like you very much. They can forge a packet that looks like firewall traffic has gone between these two zones that are not supposed to go there. Mr. Auditor knocks on your door, and all of a sudden you're fined for being non-PCI compliant because someone put rogue events into your stream and into your SIM, the tool that you're using to prove that you're compliant, which is your tool of record, and you now have data there that you weren't expecting. So it's a problem. There are a couple of ways we can get around this problem, and this is somebody's case that they won, not mine. I didn't want to trip on it. But, what was that? Thank you. I kind of lost my train of thought. That's what I get for trying to do this impromptu without any slides, so I apologize. So we can defend against this. In the ArcSight world, because the schema is so diverse, and there's about 415 individual things in the schema that you can name, you can actually check to make sure that your checkpoint events are coming from your checkpoint firewalls. You can check to make sure that your Cisco events are coming through the syslog daemon like they're supposed to, and you can check to see that your Windows event logs are coming from Windows event log parser. Because embedded in the parser, there's this thing called agent type, which is basically telling you the type of agent that's doing the data. So you can set up a check, a sanity check, that looks for events where those things mismatch, and then they alert you that there's a problem and that people are forging data in your network. Other SIMs have some similar capabilities. My expertise lies with ArcSight, because that's what I was born and raised on, and when I moved into the SIM world. So I speak from that perspective, and if other people feel like chiming in saying, I use Cisco Mars and this is how it does it, please let me know. So that's really the crux of it. That's the base of it. I gave my whole talk in almost 5 minutes because it's that simple and it's that straightforward. There's a lot more we can jump into with things about, you can forge and you can do this, you can have malicious users. One of the other things you can do to the SIM is if the SIM's not robust, it's not set up well, you can flood it with packets and basically create a denial of service. So if you're trying to be a very creative pen tester and sneak in, you're on the wire, let's say they let you plug into the DMZ and you're starting to do your pen test from there, you can create these new events or massive amount of events that bogs down the SIM, so then when you go to do the real stuff, they really can't see what the heck's going on. Yes? If it works, it works. I haven't jumped into that, but it's, again, if you're encrypted and doing what you're supposed to do with it, and, if it works, it works. Okay.
That's a good way to go. That one's encrypted, and ArcSight does a lot of different data once it gets it, but it's still, a lot of times it's easier to encrypt that.
There are some other ways we can do this too, with kind of doing some air gap and protection through architectural measures. You can have dedicated syslogs in syslog servers that are in your DMZ and they aren't going, boundary to boundary to boundary to boundary, and you can have your parsers or, ArcSight calls them smart connectors, but different companies call them different things, or agents or whatever. But you can put those local to the files, so the parsing is done closest out to the edge device, so there's less of an ability to tamper with the data that's getting scooped up into your system. So that way you can go to bed and sleep easy at night and not feel as bad about what the heck's going on. What other good things we can do? Private networks between different things. If you know what's going on, you can have a crossover cable and make sure if you're going to be sending that unencrypted data across the wire, or you're stuck doing that, you do it over a dedicated cable, dedicated link that people aren't going to sniff into. Yes, sir? No. I need to. That's why, again, this is, kind of a nascent version of a talk and things that I'm putting together. So. So that's really the long and short of it. Any other questions or? That's one of the pitfalls. It's one of the things you have to go into it. We can at least design against it. We can sanity check within the sim to make sure it's okay. We can do architectural considerations to make sure that we're limiting the exposure to having data injected that shouldn't be there. And that gives us at least a little bit more reasonable way to sleep at night. But it is something you have to look out for. And it's a problem because in so many sim deployments that I've been a part of or seen over the years, nobody has thought about this. Nobody looks at it. And the syslog infrastructure, which is there, it's legacy, it's there, people don't think about it. It's, I don't want to say it's an appliance on the network, it's not an appliance on the network, but it's that type of thing. It's this low-level minutia detail that nobody wants to pay attention to. But we need to pay attention to it because if you don't, you can be in a lot of trouble. Thanks. If you ask good questions, you get a plaque.
I actually have more. If you guys want to, I will be in this room in 5 minutes with one class. How many should it be? Five more people? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yes, you did. That's the last slide.
No slides. I suppose I'll stand at the pulpit.
We are gathered here today.
All right. If everyone would please rise. I'm not joking. Please rise. Okay, now be seated. I'm sorry. I've been preaching for several years now, and I always wanted to do that to an audience. So the thing I'm going to tell you about today is a remote layer 1 exploit that Sergey Bradis here and I wrote, and we won a Pony Award for this last night for most innovative research. Usually, when you're writing a memory corruption exploit, you have a computer. I'm not wearing the pony hat. Okay. You don't. This isn't a democracy. You don't vote in church. I'm the one who's inspired by God, and you're supposed to listen to me, right? This is okay. So it's not the color of the hat. It's the weave of the straw, right? I'm not wearing the pony. I draw a line. I'm not wearing the pony. Okay. So usually when you write a memory corruption exploit, you've got a computer and you're trying to corrupt its memory in order to trick it into running your software. And there are all sorts of variants of this. You might be trying to get it to run in software that's already there, as in a return to libc or a return to programming attack. But you're trying to find a software bug, and then leverage that bug in order to get your thing done. But not all exploits need to work that way. Sergey and I started looking at the lower levels of wireless networks. So you've got a wireless packet coming out, and it's received by a receiver. And in the middle is this magic black box that somehow gets your packet out onto the air and then back in on the other side. And sometimes the packets don't come back out the other side. They get damaged in the air. And usually they get dropped. And they're dropped because of the CRC being bad. But the CRC isn't really intended to prevent crafting, because anyone can make the right CRC for the right frame. So when you have unencrypted digital radio, you have all of these little gadgets that are working together to get the packets in and out, and some of these are exploitable, and they're exploitable by memory corruption in the packet that still gets in the other end even though it's damaged, because the checksumming is done after the packet is handed off to the stack. So if you imagine you're going to join me up here? Cool.
I'm going to provide a visual aid.
Okay.
I'm going to be bites. More bites in the air.
All right. Now, on Star Trek, how every other episode the transporters get fucked up, and you wind up with two Rikers or something, and it's always Riker, right? Then you get Riker with a beard, you get Riker with everything else. So
that doesn't happen only because of checksumming. And if you had checksumming on, then all of these other Rikers would just get killed on arrival, right? Like an alert would go off, they'd have their fake Riker, and they would, shove them out the airlock. So if you disable this and you start looking at the packets that come in, you can observe the noise. And when you see this noise, you learn that everything that's in a textbook in communication theory about how a packet should be damaged is a complete and utter load of horseshit that's designed to make the math work out easier.
And we usually illustrate this with a Russian nesting doll and a picture of truck in a truck in a truck holding a car.
They do that in Russia. They take the little truck and they put that into the larger truck and they put that into the larger truck. And, all right. So one of the things that you're told in communications theory class is that you have some sort of probability that a symbol will be damaged. And then using probability theory, you can figure out how many symbols within your packet have been damaged. And if it's more than one, then you lose the packet. You also have error correction codes, which allow you to survive this damage a little bit. But you're told that the chance of any given symbol being damaged is pretty much independent of where it is in the packet. And that's horseshit. Because when a packet is damaged, it's not damaged by the range being bad. It's damaged by some other jerk using the same frequency. Wi-Fi and Zigbee and Bluetooth can't see each other. So they don't know not to transmit over each other. They can do a clear channel assessment, but this isn't perfect, and this only works when they're right next to each other. So a packet is really damaged by having its beginning cut off or its end cut off. Or it's completely obliterated and nothing gets through.
So you've got your digital radio.
You got to
and
hold the microphone.
Yes. And what it does, it keeps pulling bytes out of the air. And imagine that Riker is being transmitted your way. So which of those bytes are noise that's always there, that you're always pulling out of the air? And which ones of those are Riker? How do you know when the Riker starts? That's a real question. So it so happens that the way this is done is that there is a special sequence of bytes that you can pull out of the air that are called the starter frame delimiter. And when you, and as you're pulling bytes out of the air in your little chip, you are comparing them using a shift register with this standard sequence. And if it matches, then you start receiving Riker.
So in Wi-Fi, it's a lot more complicated. And I have a lecture from the Chaos Communications Congress on how to do it there. But in Zigbee, it's really simple. You can write it down on a napkin. The starter frame marker is 00A7. So in the sea of background noise, whenever the radio sees 00A7, that's where the packet begins. After this is a length field, and then you've got the rest of your packet. And when you have an unencrypted packet, everyone knows that people can sniff it, and everyone knows that people can inject it. We're not interested in either of those things, because we're trying to inject without actually having a radio. Now think about that for a second. We don't have a radio. I'm trying to make a string that when I send to Alice, and she forwards it over the radio to Bob, in an area that I'm not located in, that over the air it becomes a packet.
And for all we care, this area may be in your Faraday cage, as long as it contains that link between Alice.
So the way that this works is that when you control the bytes inside of a packet, the OSI model tells us that it's encapsulated in other things, and so long as the encapsulation is not broken, we have nothing to worry about. So the way that we break the encapsulation is we realized that when you control a substring of an unencrypted packet, you control the symbols that go out on the air.
And the symbols that the card will pull out of the air and will keep comparing to its little starter frame delimiter.
So you've got this machine that's running through the symbols that it's yanking out of the air. And it's just looking for 00A7. Is it there yet? No. Is it there yet? No. Is it there yet? No. And it does this for every single nibble that comes out. And it's looking for 00A7. Now, if it does find it, then it keeps going and it sees our string as being a string inside of the packet. This is why there is no string you can send that can't be delivered over the air. The way that our attack string works is that we put 00A7 in the middle of the packet. Specifically, what we want to do is we want to make the bytes, which when put out over the air, sound exactly like a packet. Now, of course, you're thinking this won't be received because there's a real packet around it, and the receiver is going to see the real 00A7 before it sees my fake 00A7. This is where the noise thing comes in. Because when your textbook lies to you about noise, and it tells you that damage is equally probable in any given nibble, it neglects the fact that that's only done to make the probability theory easy to do. So you get really, really nice, simple probability theory, just like in your probability theory textbook, but it's wrong. It's completely wrong. Because it's neglecting the fact that either the beginning of your packet or the end of your packet gets chopped off. So when the beginning of the packet is chopped off, your sequence looks like this. You've got your receiver. It has these symbols that it's yanking out of the air, and it's putting them through a matching function, looking for 00A7. Until it finds it, it's in background noise mode, looking for a packet to begin. After that, it's in packet mode, and it thinks that it's just grabbing the bytes of data to forward up the stack. So if the beginning is chopped off, and it doesn't get that 00A7, then it keeps on ticking, and it listens to bytes within the packet, thinking that those are background noise. That's where it gets to my 00A7 that I included as plain text, because I control the bytes that go out over the air. And when it snaps in on that, it sees my packet with my start of frame delimiter, with my length, with my content, and with my checksum, which is valid because my inner packet is shorter. This allows me to remotely inject a layer 1 frame without a software vulnerability or bug anywhere. And this works on all forms of unencrypted digital radio that allow for variable packet length, do not have cryptography, and do have a predictable start of frame marker. So I can email a Wi-Fi beacon, and it's standard compliant and does not depend upon a bug. Ain't that nifty? All right.
So one way to explain it is that you have this whale, and it's got the Jonah inside. And I start throwing whales at Travis. And,
Through the transporter, right? And I'm catching them through this transporter, and sometimes I get the pair, and sometimes I miss the beginning of the whale, but I catch the beginning of the Jonah.
And then you get the Jonah, and the whale kind of disappears.
Yeah. Of course, in Star Trek, every now and then you'd get Jonah with a whale inside. And, that could be inconvenient. Yeah. Then the whale would be outside. And a bowl of petunias, was it? Yeah. Things change. All right. Thank you kindly. I believe we have time for a few questions. How would I what? So in 2007, there was what was called the month of kernel bugs. And this was lovely. They started fuzzing some of the fields in Wi-Fi that you're not supposed to be able to change. Specifically, the length of the SSID. Because an SSID is only legal when it's beneath, I think, 21 letters, maybe fewer.
Actually, there was another one with the zero-linked SSID, which also used to crash computers.
So they leveraged this crash into a weaponized exploit for the Wi-Fi driver. And the cool thing is that Mac Wi-Fi drivers are just copy and pasted from Windows. And lots of people knew Windows reverse engineering back then, so they were able to actually port it over and get reliable kernel code execution in Mac and Windows. And I think there's also one for Linux. Now, the nifty thing about this is that there were several of these bugs that came out. Most of them were for probe responses. So those you can't do with my technique unless you're able to receive signals from the area. And the only situation in which you can receive a signal but not send one is in satellite communications. But for Wi-Fi, I could make, say, an advertisement on a website, that contains this malicious packet. And when you view that website over unencrypted Wi-Fi, you start putting this malicious beacon frame. And for the variety that is a beacon frame alone instead of a probe response, this is just a one single packet. If that goes out over the air, your Windows XP machine has remote code execution in its kernel. And you could actually sell this as an ad, and then everyone in every internet cafe that is viewing this ad is spewing this malicious packet out to everyone around them. Which is one hell of an infection vector, because the infection method itself is not something that appears on the victim's machine. Could be in a machine elsewhere in the room or in a separate room, and it would still hit you. In satellite communications, you quite often, if you broadcast illegally up to a bird, that is very offensive and might get helicopters sent after you. But if you send something through the internet to a user of that satellite, and the signal goes all the way up to the bird and then all the way down, then this still allows you to put substrings on the satellite link. You just don't control the entire frame. So if you can do packet-in-packet on the satellite link, and I've not looked at the PHY layer of that protocol to verify that it's possible there, but if you can, then you could send packet-in-packet injections to one user on a given bird and a given frequency, with inner packets addressed to the other user. And then, as far as your intended victim goes, every time your injection fails, his modem says, oh, this isn't addressed to me, I'd better drop it and forget about it. And only on that time when it succeeds would it actually go through. And all of the others wouldn't be logged or anything like that, because he's not going to log packets that belong to another user. All sorts of fun stuff. We also have methods for jamming using this. This will be coming out in a subsequent paper. You can do started frame delimiter followed by the maximum length, just sort of in a tight loop, and you broadcast that just loud enough for a receiver to hear you. And what this does is it hogs all of the time slots. And because those time slots are hogged, if someone else is transmitting with a much more powerful antenna, such that I can't actually override them in my transmission, well, it doesn't matter, because the receiver will still be hogged by receiving my fake frames. And the only case in which his packet will arrive is if it happens to come at the very end of one of my fake packets. You can also abuse the started frame delimiter to sniff the Microsoft Wireless keyboards. At the RSA conference this year, they had a Microsoft Security Pavilion to remind you that their products were secure and that they took security seriously and all of this stuff. And what they neglected to notice was that all of the wireless keyboards that they used at their demos were vulnerable to a 3-year-old vulnerability that every one of the badges I made for the Next Hope conference can packet sniff. Okay. So I think I'm out of time, but thank you kindly, and have fun, and I'll be around if you'd care to grab a beer and ask me a question there. All right.
And if you care to look at the latest track, there is a confession there signed Manu Lafrogue, and it's called How I Misunderstood Digital Radio. It might make a good devotional reading.
All right. Thank you kindly, and go in peace. If you could pass me that laptop, the one in front of you. Yep. Thank you kindly.
Where's that now? Do we have a connection?
Should be there. Is it on
Chapel? All right, let's see. Okay. Let's see. Back to the beginning. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to my talk on smart grids and subpoenas. So let me ask here, how many people here, if any, have a smart meter? 0. How many people come from states where smart meters are installed extensively? Anyone know? And the state would be? California? Georgia? Any other state? Texas. Okay, but you don't have one yourself? No, and you don't have one? New Jersey. Okay. Anyone here been subpoenaed? Had their data subpoenaed? Had their data be the subject of a warrant? No? Okay. All right, that gives me a good idea of everyone's personal involvement in this topic. So I'm going to talk about the vulnerabilities related to the smart grid and smart meters that tend to be far more extensive than most people are aware. So the vulnerabilities I'm talking about are the data and the extensive data that's collected by smart meters. And the threat is to civil liberties. And it's basically, I'm going to review the case law related to thermal imaging and energy usage, as well as CALEA and some of the other statutes that are used to subpoena the information. The threat that I'm talking about today is from government surveillance. So there are a number of threats related to the smart grid, and this is just the one that I'm going to particularly focus on today since we have such a short time. And I'm going to talk about subpoenas and warrants, but also national security letters. Anyone here familiar with national security letters? This is a topic that's gotten a lot of attention lately from Chris Soghoian and other people studying privacy. And then talk a little bit about what's being done to mitigate the threat. And so the next question is, who am I? Who am I anyway? And so briefly, I was formerly a senior vice president and senior executive at Putnam Investments, a subsidiary of Marsh McLennan, in charge of disaster recovery and security, among other things, during their failover from the World Trade Center during 9/11. What's my connection to the smart grid? I sit on the NIST cybersecurity working group on the smart grid for privacy and security. I'm a PhD student right now in the College of Computing and Information Science at Northeastern University. I just finished my master's degree at Boston University in computer science, and I'm actually concurrently doing a second master's degree at Boston University. I don't know why. I don't know why I'm doing a PhD either, but it's a lot of fun. I have a preceptorship at Northeastern University Law School on cyber law, doing a clinic there. I have a certificate in private investigation. That's neither here nor there. And I also am a video producer at CCTV for full disclosure. Any other questions? Okay. So the vulnerability, those of you who come from states that have smart meters may have heard more about it. But smart grid information that's collected from everyone's private homes is a significant step up in information about what people are doing. And the aspects of it that are related to it are its granularity, the short intervals at which it's collected, the fact that it's real time or can be real time, that it's bidirectional because it allows people to sell excess energy as well as buying energy, and that it also includes location data because it's increasingly used for PEVs, electronic vehicles, which are becoming more. Anyone have an electronic vehicle? No? Think about getting one? No? Okay. So the question is how much closer it brings us to George Orwell's thinking about 1984, in which data about us is so well known that our every movement is practically known and trackable on a real-time basis. So this is actually a 3-year-old graphic that we used on the NIST Cybersecurity Working Group in our 2010 publication on security and privacy in the smart grid. So this is like very, very 3 years ago. But what it's intended to show is the granularity with which your energy data reveals the exact activities that you're doing in your house at your time. So in this one, we see when the fellow's opening the refrigerator, he then puts a kettle on the stove here and uses a toaster. These So that just gives an idea of what we're talking about in terms of the granularity of the information. Actually, your energy footprint reveals not only whether you're watching your television or what other appliances you're using, but it can reveal exactly what you're watching. Every movie and television show has a unique energy footprint that can be traced through smart grid usage. Who is in your house, whether you're in your house, who you're with in your house, what you did minute by minute while you were in the house. All that information is very, very clear when you look at your energy footprint. So it's a significant increase in the amount of data. When you think about this kind of data, it kind of makes the days when people are concerned about their telecommunication information or their GPS location information, it makes that seem quaint, as if it were the good old days when that was the only information that was available about you. The source of that graphic, by the way, is a smart metering and privacy publication. So the background in case law related to energy usage data is the Kelo case. Anyone familiar with Kelo? It's a famous case of the that was mentioned yesterday by Spencer. Anyone come to Spencer's talk on the smart grid where he hacked a smart meter? As a kind of an accompanying. Spencer McIntyre came in here yesterday and did a demonstration of hacking a smart meter, a real-time demonstration that I thought was fascinating, and mentioned Kelo. It's a case in which marijuana grower, a suspected marijuana grower, was arrested by the FBI. They got a warrant and used thermal imaging technology, sat outside his house at the curb in a police car, and were able to do thermal imaging readings. They then went and compared that to average usage and obtained arrest warrant on the basis of showing the differential between his average usage and the average usage of a person that doesn't grow marijuana, apparently. This case was overturned. It ultimately went to the Supreme Court and was overturned, and the Supreme Court ruled that you may not use thermal imaging, that it constituted an unlawful search and seizure, that the use of thermal imaging technology was a search. And it's a very famous case because it's one of the first cases in which new technology was used and was the privacy protections of the Fourth Amendment were fundamentally upheld. Since that time, the number of rulings that uphold the Fourth Amendment have become fewer and farther between. So CALEA is the statute. Anyone familiar with CALEA here? Communications and Law Enforcement Act. This is the law passed in 1994 in which telecommunications data was first widely subpoenaed. And it's used extensively today, far, far more extensively than it was originally envisioned in 1994. What's interesting about CALEA is that it was originally used principally for the war on drugs, and today, because of the breakdown of information that's publicly available through FOIA, we can see that it continues to be linked to subpoenas that are predominantly related to the war on drugs. And Chris Soghoian recently did some research, and I don't know if, does anyone here know Chris Soghoian? Anyone familiar with his work? He's the guy that published the fake boarding pass for Osama bin Laden, and the FBI raided his home and arrested him and confiscated his laptop. Anyway, he's just submitted his long-awaited doctoral dissertation last week, which is very interesting reading for people that like to read that sort of thing. And he talked about, he made a hypothesis that the war on drugs was selected to be pursued because it results in large amounts of cash that's confiscated by law enforcement from drug agents. And so in a way, it's a self-funding kind of a war. But anyway, that's just sort of a footnote. In 2004, CALEA was expanded substantially to cover voice over IP and broadband internet, which was specifically excluded in 1994. And between 2004 and 2007, there was a tremendous expansion in CALEA-based subpoenas that were issued. Any question? No. Soghoian, in his dissertation, which he has titled In Spies We Trust, and which I quote here, notes that between AT&T and Verizon, Google, and Facebook, that he estimates that 1.5 million requests annually are being received from law enforcement agencies. What's interesting to consider is that this information is available under FOIA. What's not available is the information that's being requested by intelligence agencies, and there are a number of other means and channels of collecting information. So 1.5 million is just a fraction of the requests that are actually being made of these corporations. the only means, though, by which information is being requested by major corporations like Google and Verizon. National security letters have become increasingly the avenue of choice for collecting information. Do not require probable cause, no judicial oversight, no reasonable cause, actually require nothing at all, and can now be signed by junior people in agencies. Did anyone just go to EFF's talk in which they talked a little bit about it? You were there, so yeah, you, of course, okay. EFF has done a huge amount of work in this area and are currently continuing to do a lot of work in this area. So national security letters are increasingly being talked about. They were actually started in 1978 to circumvent a law, the Right to Financial Privacy Act, and then they were significantly expanded in '86. On 9/11, there was another really significant expansion under the Patriot Act. In 2004, in Doe versus Ashcroft, they were found to be unconstitutional, which did not stop them in the least. Between 2003 and 2006, there were over 200,000 national security letters issued. And again, national security letters are simply letters that state that an agent feels that there may be a link to an ongoing investigation of many varieties. Don't actually require any evidence, don't have to go before a judge or, really submit anything. Interestingly, in 2006 was the same year that the Department of Justice Inspector General issued their own audit and found that there was widespread abuse of the national security letters. So a few years after the expansion of the Patriot Act, the Department of Justice's own Inspector General said these letters are being completely misused on a widespread basis. There's no justification for them. When we look at them, we find they are not substantially linked to any legitimate investigation, which also has barely slowed down the use of NSL. In that year, 2006, there were 53,000 national security letters issued, according to the government's disclosure. The next year, there were 16,000. So there was immediately a substantial drop, at least in what was reported. However, the numbers have since climbed right back up. They are used in lieu of a subpoena or a warrant or any type of judicial oversight or anything to compel corporations, mainly telecommunications companies, but also Google, Facebook, and other companies, to provide your personal information relating to your email, your phone calls, and anything else related to your communications.
So they're like a request for compliance that's not a legal entity?
Exactly. So the Craigslist killer, who was working his wares in Boston in 2009, he was captured through data that was obtained using CALIA. So Boston law enforcement got a subpoena from a judge, within 15 minutes of requesting it on an emergency basis, and captured his information and then accompanying in a close-by cell tower to the Westin Hotel. So that's an example of using a subpoena, with judicial oversight. The national security letters, the police or many agencies, FBI, all they do is write this national security letter, and they bypass even that minimal sort of judicial oversight.
If I'm like Verizon and I get an NSL, I can say no, can't I?
You could, and they're totally not saying no. So what's interesting to know about national security letters is that there have been two challenges to them. Out of 200,000 NSLs issued, there have been only two challenges. One was in 2006. It was resolved in 2010. And the interesting thing about NSLs is that they include gag orders, so the recipients are not allowed to reveal that they've received them. And in fact, they also appeared to prevent recipients from even discussing them with their lawyers, which was the subject of an ACLU and Electronic Frontier Foundation lawsuit in 2006, which they won, to the extent of saying that, no, that's not allowed. There has to be judicial oversight. You have to be able to talk to your lawyer. We have 2 minutes left. Because the law, the NSL law that was passed, says they can. But nobody cares about that. They just do it anyway. Amazing. We think that if it's ruled unconstitutional, then people stop doing it, but they don't. Okay, so at NIST, we are attempting to mitigate what's going on with these national security letters and the smart grid. We're really concerned about the disclosure, along with Electronic Frontier Foundation. EFF and ACLU have been filing a number of lawsuits. Here I've included Chris Segoyan's doctoral dissertation that he submitted last week, July of 2012, for those of you who may be interested. This is related solely to telecommunications. My interest is in smart grid information, but they're very closely related. This is a summary of the NIST 7628 is the publication that we on the Cybersecurity Working Group published in 2010, in which we call attention to this and a number of other threats as part of the Smart Grid Interoperability Panel. And the future of smart grid privacy is depending on the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the ACLU, EPIC, Electronic Privacy Information Center, NIST, our cybersecurity working group that's trying to call attention to this, and you. And that's the end of my presentation. Thanks. I cleared them out.
Thought was over. Oh well.
Cleared everyone out.
Nice and quick. Is that your bag?
I'm going to stay. Yes, but I'm going to sit in the back of the room because that's for hecklers.
Oh, okay. I'll encourage it. Well, it's a nice personal talk. I can change the talk now based on who's in the room. It's the one advantage.
I'm the official heckler.
Official heckling.
That's right. Well, you,
I will check. I might be a little off. I only stopped mining because I only had one man. I had to keep everybody at a certain time. If I knew your life, keep it on forever.
no, I think they go on until like 7 p.m.
Well, it's me and no gap. Well, maybe you might want to wait because there is no one. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's my reach to the recorder. Bad timing. Bad timer, no overtime. No, I didn't say bad timing. Bad timing. Oh.
You know what I think it is? I think that reporters pass the hour. People get out of other talks that on the hour that wait for other
There's only one more talk in here, which is just me doing one down because we can't fill the gap. But then we've got a gap. I'm imagining that the reason why the gap is there now is actually because there is something else on the field.
Maybe.
Yeah, this one is for when we have to have the home. So I think that if you wait until 11 and more people may come in. What's that?
Check time.